So this section will go through a little bit of the history of the development of animals, but this is really only going to look at some of the really large steps, and I don't expect you to know these era names or the times. What I'm looking for you to get out of this is just kind of the general trends in animal evolution over the history of animal life on Earth. So the very first animals that we can find fossils of are typically called the edicarian bodies, so the edicarian animals. And this was 600 to 500 million years ago. So here's an example of a fossil of an edicarian animal. This is not, but this has a hole in it, indicating that some animal likely drilled into this to eat it as food. So these first animals are all aquatic, so these would all be found in the ocean. They're not really highly terrestrial at this point. And these are named edicarian because they were found in the Edicarian Hills of Australia. That's where the fossils were found. Some are classified as snails or other relatives. Some of these are sponges or cnidarians, like jellyfish. There's a lot that can't be classified because all we have is a fossil impression, and it's extremely different from the living animals that we have today. Skip forward about 100 to 300 million years, and we see the Paleozoic era. Again, you don't have to remember the eras. And in the Paleozoic era, we have an extremely important event called the Cambrian explosion. And this is where most of our animal fossils start to appear. Before the Cambrian explosion, we had very similar body shapes. There were only a few different phyla had been observed. This explosion is an example of rapid diversification. And this happened in the oceans. And there's a lot of different hypotheses about what caused this explosion. One of them is the development of novel predator forms, so the development of things like locomotion, which is going to make predators much more effective because they're able to move around and not just wait for themselves to bump into something. In response to that, we say prey adaptations. So you can see that this guy looks like he is a predator. The prey are also going to have armored shells, so we start to see things like armor, claws, teeth. There was a decline in the edicarian bodies, so we think that the edicarians were soft body, meaning that they didn't have like hard shells and stuff outside of them, and so when that comes in contact with a predator, it's going to likely be eaten. So the development of prey, animals that are hunted that have spines or claws or shells or some kind of scales or armor, was going to be advantageous here. We also believe that there were genetic changes in the Hox genes. So maybe mutations or duplications of the Hox genes, allowing for more genetic diversity to allow for kind of this rapid development of changes in body forms. So most of the fossils from the Cambrian explosion are called bilaterans. So bilateral is meaning that there's two sides of the body. So I can cut this animal in half only one way, and it's got equal left and right sides. So same thing for this animal back here. It's got equal left and right sides. These have a complete digestive tract, which means that it's got one-way digestion that goes all the way from the mouth through the body to the anus, which is new. Some of the early animals, like the sponges and the cnidarians, like the jellyfish and the corals, those don't have two exits. They have one opening where the food comes in that opening, and then it has to leave through the same opening. But with a one-way digestive system, we now have an opening that's the entrance and an opening that's the exit. The next major phase in animal life on Earth, now we're seeing majorly terrestrial animals. So again, Mesozoic, so we're skipping ahead several 100 million years. And we start to see the emergence of coral reefs. And during this area, the terrestrial vertebrates were mostly dinosaurs, and that includes birds. So Archaeopteryx right here is our first bird, and birds are considered dinosaurs. This is when mammals were thought to have emerged, but most of these mammals would have been very small-bodied organisms. So these would have been kind of looking almost like rodents that would have run around kind of under the dinosaurs' feet. They were not the dominant, large-bodied animals that we think of today. During this era, this is when angiosperms and insects underwent massive diversification. So this is when we start to see the beginnings of lots of flowering plants, lots of different types of insects. And then our last era is called the Cenozoic, and that's from about 66 million years ago to the present. So today would still be considered Cenozoic era. And this follows the mass extinction of terrestrial and marine animals. So I'm talking about the extinction of the large non-flying dinosaurs, as well as the large marine reptiles, things like plesiosaurs that lived in the ocean. So when these huge dominant terrestrial and aquatic reptiles were gone, that left a giant vacated ecological niche. And mammals were able to grab onto this and explode. So after the extinction of the dinosaurs, with the exception of birds, mammals were able to kind of become the dominant terrestrial organism. So mammals grew larger in body size, and so you can see this kind of artist's idea of what it looked like. And this looks a lot more like what you would see today, obviously not exactly. During this area, the global climate cooled down, and a cooler climate is going to be much better for organisms like mammals that are able to regulate their own body types. We think that primates developed in Africa and adapted to open woodlands and savannas of Africa. And then eventually, obviously, we're primates. Humans would have evolved from groups of primates out of Africa.